I would like to ask Professor Imran to please join the panel and start by introducing yourself, please, and also Suhail Ahmed, please. Just give a minute for Professor Imran to introduce himself.
He knows more than us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Imran Ajaz. I'm an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Michigan Dearborn. So I teach at the same place as Professor Stockton does, and it's a pleasure to see you here. I'd just like to thank you all for being here, and I'd like to thank Wissam for giving me the opportunity to be up here. So are we talking about anything specific?
No.
Okay, great. So that was some heavy stuff. We started with lying beliefs to how Muslims find atheism. So let's see. I guess the first question is, what is the purpose of religion? And I think that we have different answers for that. And I'd like to hear what the panelists have to say about that. I was taught that religion is a guidebook to humanity on how to treat each other and how to understand the world we live in and the purpose for why we're here. So anyone who'd like to begin, please go ahead.
It's an easy question, I think, to ask, but it's a difficult one to answer, right? Because I think it means so many different things to different people. So I remember when I was learning about religion, people had pointed out that the etymology for the word comes from, I think, the Latin word which means to bind together, right? And certainly I think in the case of Islam, one of the functions, and there are many functions, is to bring people together. You know, in Islam there's this idea of the ummah, right, the community, and the benefits that provides. So that's the one thing I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure people will add more.
I'm a political scientist, and I think of I look at Lebanon, where there are religious groups. I look at Iraq, where there are religious groups. They've been involved in politics. I think of religious groups as, when I teach, I think of religious groups as political groupings. I tell students that these should be viewed as ethnic groups, having very little to do with theology. And I look in terms of organization, I look in terms of leadership, I look in terms of ideology. These are all things that political scientists deal with. We don't deal with divine things. We don't deal with revelation. We don't know anything about those things. So I think of religion in terms of the political process and political struggles. That was the focus of my talk, that basically there are political struggles that take a religious form. So I don't deal with those original principles or higher thoughts.
So the question is, what is the purpose of religion?
Yes.
Well, that's going to be different according to each religion, right? So in Islam, it might be to worship God. In Christianity, it might be the same. From a non-religious point of view, somebody may look at it differently, but I think each religion has its own reason for existing, depending on which God they believe in and what their theology says or what their book says. Nietzsche may say that it's opium of the masses, but you can look at history and look at it as a way of people knowing each other, almost. You know, if you go back thousands of years, you don't have to really get to know somebody. You have to, in a small amount of time, figure out, is this my friend or this is my enemy? And in a way, it became a connection piece too, because go back to Islamic times, and if you're a Muslim in Africa or you're a Muslim in the Middle East, you had a common bond, and then you would not be considered an enemy. Now it's probably less of that. It's become more of a belief system, philosophical system, and a way of people connecting with each other?
I think there are, all of those elements exist. I think of it as two, there are two parts of the stories. One is why did religion evolve and grow to be such a big part of the human mind and the psychology of it. The second is, well, how has religion been used? So how it's been used, I think you were talking about a little bit, that it's a great way to manipulate masses, to get them to do what you want them to do, and to get them to conform to a certain code of societal order. But then there's a personal aspect, and I'll tell a short anecdote. When I was a little kid, I used to run after ants in school. Ants as in, not your sisters, I'm talking about like the insects. And they would run away from me. They knew that they were gonna die, that I was gonna stomp on them. We were horrible kids. But, and it was amazing to me that something with such a rudimentary central nervous system that can't really process the idea of death still knew that it was going to die. And that is the instinct of self-preservation that every microorganism, every insect, the most basic of species have. They want to preserve themselves. Now, human beings, we have central nervous systems that are advanced enough to comprehend the idea that we're going to die. It's all going to be over, that there's nothing we can do about it. And there's a conflict. We have the same powerful self-preservation instinct that insects and bacteria have, but we also have the knowledge that it is inevitable that we're going to die, and the self-preservation is just not going to happen. And I think that psychologically, the main thing, the source of comfort, and this applies to me too, that I got from religion was just the idea that there's some kind of continuity, that this isn't all there is. There's more to this out there. And it's just a very, very massive defense mechanism for a very fundamental and irresolvable conflict that we all share.
As others have mentioned, that question is really broad, and there can be so many assumptions that we come to approaching that question. So to provide maybe some tighter value, I'd like to take the liberty of narrowing it, perhaps, and suggesting that a lot of times when a question like that is posed, many of us, I think, would ask ourselves or be seeking the answer of what is the purpose, or potentially the purpose of religion to me or to society, to us going forward. Does it even have a place? As opposed to sort of historically, where did it come from? Why did it develop? So if that were the direction of the question we'd like to answer, then I think in terms of going forward, we can learn how it might serve us by looking back. And some of the things that have been mentioned today about community, ritual, understanding, or providing a bit of a template for our lives, some best practices for living. I think those are all great things that religion can serve, but also when we think of religion in terms of the good things, historically there's been a lot of bad things that have gone with it. So if we think about how can we get some of those good things, and that as human beings we tend to create, if we take the sort of non-theistic viewpoint, if we tend to as societies create these communities and rituals and belief systems because they serve a human need, then I think the purpose of religion going forward can be to serve, to create something that can serve a lot of these needs without the baggage of historical truth claims that don't add up. Without the baggage of, we like these nice parts of the Quran, but I get really squeamish with this whole what your right hands possess, or this part about slavery that, encourages you to free your slave, but why are there still slaves in the final book? Why wasn't there a temporary book 100 years earlier that told you how to free your slaves? And then when the Quran came, okay, now it's the final, we're ready to cut off slavery. I mean, we had so many Jewish prophets. Why couldn't we have a few Arab prophets or something leading up to Muhammad? So in that way, we're going to always have the baggage of religion that's negative. And sometimes we, as human beings, we're optimistic creatures. We think toward the future. So I think if we want to take the good, we've got to discard the bad. And so the purpose of religion is to not actually be religion in the way it was in the past with all that baggage, but to be something new that we create that gives us maybe a mix of community, some best practices for living, some rituals, and it's opt-in, and something that builds into its constitution the ability to revisit, to question, and learn from the lessons of the religions of the past that made so many mistakes.
Thank you. So before we get to the audience here, the reason I started with that question is because there seems to be unifying themes that, you know, regardless of what our religious backgrounds are, what we believe, even Professor Stockton, you know, with a political science background, it's about how people interact with each other in our relationships. So today we're talking about whether Islam and science can coexist. But clearly religion is about people and our relationships. So why is it that we put so much emphasis on a guidebook, let's call the Quran a guidebook, to explain science to us? And do you think that, and again this is for the panelists, do you think that the way that modern day and scholars up until the modern day, the way they interpret the Quran is limited when they're only looking at it from a literal sense or you know, moral sense or allegorical sense, and they don't actually explore how science can fit into it? Or are we asking too much?
I'll pass this along because I've just spoken, even though I have some thoughts.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions there. Can I?
Start wherever you want.
Also, well, I like the tail end of it. What you said about the when we look at the scriptures as a guidebook, and is the idea of multiple interpretations and looking at it literally. Everybody is terrified of us reading the book literally. So this is just kind of one thing I want to get to. That means that they know, right? And you know, they'll say